for a 2016 Expertise in Business webinar. And I'll be acting as moderator for today's webinar. We have a super packed schedule today, which includes 5 presenters. Each of them selected for both really their expertise in their particular area and also for the importance of these practice areas to local business leaders. So quick reminder, if you have any questions, just enter them into your GoToWebinar panel and I'll get them to the proper presenter. So let's get started. So we have 5 people today. Mimi Soule, founder and attorney at Soule Employment Law Firm. Keith Langbo, who's founder and CEO of Kelaca. Mariryan Starr, who's president over at Modus. Street Jones, who's broker at Rich Commercial Realty. And last but not least, me, founder of Technology Associates. So here's what's on our agenda for today. First, Mimi's going to take us through some important employment legislation updates that are coming up. Keith is going to talk about the war for talent and give you a couple of tips on how to win that. Mariryan's going to talk marketing around choosing your words wisely. Street's going to give us a rundown of the real estate trends coming up in 2016. And then I'm going to lay out a couple of changes that are coming from Microsoft and how they're going to affect you. We've got some time at the end for Q&A, but again, if you have questions as we go, please feel free to pipe in there. So first, employment legislation updates. So Mimi Soule, founder and attorney at Soule Employment Law Firm. She focuses on employment law with an adaptable approach that enables her to provide creative, outside-the-box solutions. I know from talking with many of Mimi's customers that she is awesome at what she does. So I'm excited to hear about what she says. So Mimi, take it away.
Wow, what an intro. Thanks so much, Eric. I'm so flattered to be a part of this very talented panel. Given our time, I'm going to kind of run through this information. I'm going to focus on some guidance and proposed new regulations coming out of the U.S. Department of Labor. Exciting topics, I'm sure, so I'll try not to put everybody to sleep. The first issue I want to start with is the Department of Labor has issued some new guidance on how employers should make a determination of whether or not a worker is an independent contractor or a W-2 employee. So before we actually talk about that new guidance, I want to talk just for a minute about the general concept of a 1099 contractor versus a W-2 employee. And the first thing I want to make sure everybody is clear on is that, unfortunately, this is not a decision that a worker or a company can decide. This is really a legal determination, and we have to look at several, in the past, we've had to look at several different tests. Many of you are probably familiar with something called the IRS 21-factor test, and that 21-factor test several years ago was expanded into a broader test, split into 3 sections on behavioral elements, financial elements, and then just generally the relationship between the worker and the business. At the end of the day, that 21-factor test really came down to this issue of control. I'm sure this is something you all are familiar with. Control in terms of how much the company was making decisions about how the worker performed the duties for the company on a day-to-day basis. Kind of in connection with that, the U.S. Department of Labor, so we have the IRS 21-factor test, and then the U.S. Department of Labor had its own test, again, basically focused on this issue of control. Well, in kind of the summer of last year, the Department of Labor issued a new test, and we think that the IRS is going to defer to this new test as well. And this new test is something called the Economic Realities Test. And we don't have a lot of time to go through exactly what this test is, but essentially it's a test with 6 new elements. I'm going to kind of quickly just read those off to you. The first is the extent to which the work performed is an integral part of the company's business. The second is, does the worker have an opportunity to earn profit and loss depending on his or her decisions? What is the extent of the relative financial investment that the worker is providing as compared to what the company is providing? 4, what or does the work that the worker is performing, does it require some sort of special skill? 5, what is the permanency of the relationship? Does it look more like the traditional employee at will relationship, or does it have a defined term? And then last, of course, what's the degree of control that the company exercises over the worker? So those are the new kind of the new concept. What I want you to keep in mind is, at the end of the day, what the Department of Labor is really looking at is whether or not the worker who we want to classify as a contractor, is that worker actually in business for themselves? So are they running a business? Are they marketing? Are they advertising? Are you as the company just one of their many clients that they work for? This is the ultimate, if you read all of those factors together, this is the ultimate point that I think the Department of Labor is really going to be focusing on. I've sent you or provided you on this slide with a link to the more information on the economic realities test, but if anyone has questions, please let me know. So once you've kind of initially done this first analysis, if you're bringing on a worker, is my worker a contractor or an employee? If you determine that they're actually an employee, then your next step really is making a determination in terms of whether or not that employee's position is exempt or non-exempt. Exempt meaning they are not entitled to any overtime if they work more than 40 hours in a work week. And before we get into some proposed regulations that are currently pending, before we get into talking about that, I want to talk just briefly about this concept of exempt versus non-exempt. And the first thing I want to point out is that I think there's a misunderstanding. There's a difference between salaried and hourly, and exempt and non-exempt. So if you pay someone a salary, it does not mean that they are exempt from overtime. Salary is just one element of an exempt position, or of many exempt positions. So the rule of thumb that I want everyone to kind of have in their mind is that all employees are non-exempt and entitled to minimum wage and overtime unless they fall under an exemption allowed by North Carolina and federal law. And I'm just speaking to those of you that have employees here in North Carolina. If some of you have employees outside of North Carolina, you may have to you need to take into consideration the state wage and hour laws in the states where the employees are providing services. So let's talk a little bit about these exemptions. In North Carolina, North Carolina follows kind of the federal exemption standards, and there are some that we generally refer to, the most common ones, as white-collar exemptions. Again, something you all are probably familiar with. 3 of the most popular that we talk about are the executive exemption, the professional exemption, and the administrative exemption. For these 3 exemptions, one of the primary elements is, in order to have an employee fall under one of these exemptions from overtime and minimum wage, is the fact that we pay them a salary. The salary requirement as of right now is $455 a week, which is about $24,000 a year, so a low bar. The second piece to these exemptions, which is what often gets overlooked, is the duties requirement. So for the executive exemption, in addition to paying the required salary, the employee must, and I'm just talking kind of general standards here, the employee must be hired to and perform primarily management duties, and management includes regularly managing the work of 2 or more full-time employees. For the professional exemption, in addition to salary, these are folks that we've hired because they've gone to school for a lengthy period of time, and we've hired them for their expertise. So typically the folks that fall under the professional exemption in an office setting are going to be your lawyers, your doctors, some engineers, folks that we hire for their expertise. The administrative exemption is probably the most popular, the most abused. The administrative exemption is not for what we consider your administrative employees, like an office assistant or a receptionist. In addition to the salary requirement, the administrative exemption applies to folks who are doing office-related work, but who have the ability to make decisions about significant business matters. So these are folks who act in the capacity of like a or perhaps an HR director. Again, these are not your low-level kind of entry positions like a receptionist or an office assistant. So the big change that we're potentially going to see coming down the pipe is a big change to the salary requirement for the 3 exemptions that I just talked about, the executive, administrative, and professional exemptions. So in July of last year, the Federal Department of Labor issued a proposed regulation. And the proposed regulation essentially is going to increase that salary requirement from $23,000 a year, $24,000 a year to about $51,000 a year. And then thereafter, the salary requirement will probably increase on a regular basis each year. So again, the duties test for those 3 exemptions is staying the same, but the salary requirement at this point will likely increase. Originally, the regulation was supposed to become effective, or they're going to issue a final regulation, I should say, the end of last year, but that got postponed. We believe now that we will probably see a final regulation sometime towards the end of this year, and that it probably will not become effective, meaning that employers won't have to start making changes until likely early 2017. So you have some time now, we think, to actually prepare. If anyone has questions about how this might impact their current employees, please let me know. But that's the general change that we are likely seeing with respect to the exempt classifications.
Awesome. Quick question here that came up. So the example is if you have, say, an office manager who is making $50,000 a year and they are currently classified as exempt, once this goes into effect, they are not exempt regardless, correct?
If they make less than the required salary amount, yes.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Outstanding. That's what I thought.
Yeah. So what you have to basically analyze is, do I want to give this person a salary increase, and then you want to make sure that someone that you've previously classified as exempt does meet the duties requirements of that exemption.
Gotcha. And you said we've got until 2017.
Yeah, we're expecting the final regulation to come out later this year, and we believe that the Department of Labor will give employers a few months to figure out how to adjust, and so we're thinking it'll probably be effective sometime early 2017.
Excellent. All right, so we can ignore this until about mid-December.
Right. Well, that, and if we have a different political party take over, it might change whether or not these actually.
We may not have to worry about it at all.
Right. So yes.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, Mimi. Okay. So next up, Keith. Keith Langbo, founder and CEO of Kelaca. Kind of really put his finger on the triangle as an ideal market quite a while back, let's see, late 2012, and it came down, I believe, from Michigan, if I'm not mistaken. Keith, you can correct me on that if you need to. Has an excellent recruiting and talent acquisition company. Going to share with us kind of some of the things that he sees small businesses need to do to kind of win the war for talent. So, Keith, take it away.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you, Mimi. The overtime thing is quite the new ruling, all those new rulings. And Eric, you're correct, came from Michigan, and very happy to be here, coming up on 4 years now. So absolutely loving our choice here, choosing the triangle. As are many others, which is one of the many parts to this war for talent that we're going to see going into 2016. But I'm going to do my best here to stay under time. I think I ran over on our dry run, so I'm going to try to run through this, but happy to take questions as we go. We have a major game of musical chairs coming up in 2016. From a national level, we're seeing that anywhere from 30 to 60% of people are looking for new jobs. As you see here in the LinkedIn survey, 30% actively looking for a new role, new opportunity, with another 60% of people passively looking that they would take something if it was offered in front of them. From a local standpoint, you can see the Triangle Business Journal survey there, and very similar results. 43% of people aggressively looking for new opportunities. So simple math says that if you have a team, a company, or a department of 10 people, that roughly 3 to 4 of those employees are aggressively looking for a new job. That means that we're going to have some openings. We're going to have some openings to fill, some roles to backfill, and unfortunately we are going to lose some talent because the game of musical chairs is going to be happening. So a high percentage. As a business owner, I like to think that this doesn't apply to me, and I've got the perfect culture and the perfect environment, and no way are 3 or 4 of my employees looking for new opportunities, but that's simply not true because the data and the polls don't lie. Perhaps we let ourselves as business owners. So this is going to create that war for talent in 2016. So I was going to spend the next slide focusing on how can we do a better job of retaining our top employees, and then ultimately how can we do a better job of identifying, recruiting, sourcing, closing on the top prospects out there in the market, top candidates, in order to backfill the openings or perhaps grow our company. So next slide, Eric. Please, sir. So employee retention. Anytime you turn on LinkedIn or any of the different publications out there, lots of articles going on about what it means to retain your employees and what matters most to them. And I think that that's really the key. If you want to talk about retaining your top employees, you need to understand as a business owner or as a manager or a leader what really matters to those employees. Most polls and surveys will show that, although people may not believe this, they'll show that compensation is not the #1 factor. And typically it's more about, do they feel recognized? Do they feel like they have an opportunity for a career advancement? Do they enjoy their environment that they work in, their physical environment? Do they enjoy the people they work with, and so on and so forth? It's not all about compensation, but it's important for us to understand what matters most to them so that then we can address that and focus on that. Recent poll from Gallup poll showed that 65% of employees have not felt recognized by their management or leadership in the last year. And so again, we may think we're the different one than the rest of it, but statistics don't lie. Unfortunately, a lot of the employees, 65%, do not feel recognized, and that's typically the #1 thing that makes them want to stay at your company. So we need to address that, put plans and strategies in place in order to help retain those top employees. And then we need to put development and growth plans in place. Career progression is another one that's often up there. And it's nice on this one because you can kind of win both ways, and that you can not only address the needs and desires of your employees to have an opportunity to grow and advance their career, but you can also have a bit of a succession or risk management plan as to what happens if someone were to leave that position, who's the next in line, and so on. So getting that succession plan in place. Next area, we know that we're going to have openings, hopefully due to growth, but certainly some due to backfill as well. How can we be constantly sourcing and generating referrals and candidates, constantly courting them, not just based on the skill sets that we need to fill a role, but based on our culture, our company culture, and our company values and what we stand for. And so what I recommend in 2016 is the continued hire slow, fire fast. But we need to be more proactive going into 2016, not reactive to here's the jobs that we have to fill now because someone left or because we have a new project, but being proactive in that we are constantly courting, constantly out there recruiting and bringing good candidates to the table based on values matches and culture matches to our companies so that we can pull those triggers ahead of time and not wait until the fire is there. Finally, not a plug for Kelaca, but certainly a plug for the idea that we bring in the experts when need be. For the same reason that I don't manage my own IT at Kelaca, or that I bring in outside CPAs or bring in outside consultants, like many on the phone here, to help with things that they're expertise in, bring in a recruiter. There's a misconception out there that recruiters cost more money. We can show you plenty of statistics, again, not just for Kelaca, but for the industry, where it's often more cost-effective to use a recruiter than to not. The Career Builder recently said that it costs you about 1% of a person's salary every day that a job goes unfilled. So if you leave a job unfilled, you're spending a lot of money just by opportunity cost, direct cost, every day that it goes unfilled. So bring a recruiter in to get it done faster and done right. let alone getting the right type of quality and really spearfishing, going out there and finding that talent and bringing in the right talent versus posting a job or putting a job posting out there and praying that we get good applicants. So at the end of the day, we're going to have a war for talent. We're going to have a big game of musical chairs in 2016. We need to win that war by focusing on employee retention, retaining our top employees, knowing what they want and taking care of it and putting plans in place to address it, and then being proactive on our recruiting needs and being out there and constantly courting and sourcing top talent based on culture and values match. That's a quick win there. Eric?
Yeah, that was a record. Awesome, Keith. And I will second that. And full disclosure, Keith is helping us with a couple of positions, and it's night and day the candidates that we see come in from, say, you guys versus coming from, like you say, the Craigslist ad and praying for applicants. And certainly speaking from experience, recruiting ahead of time, uber important, because we were caught last year with kind of our pants down when added some growth, had a guy leave, took us forever to even get a couple of candidates, and then it's like you're desperate to get somebody hired in the seat, and that's always the wrong way to do it, right?
I completely agree, Derek. We got to be proactive on that. I would say to that point, though, too, we need to know what is our succession plan for anyone in our companies. What happens if this person leaves? How do we pick up? Because the recruiting, there's going to be times where you have to be reactive versus proactive, but you need to have a plan in place to address that in the meantime. And it can't always be the owner's going to pick up the reins again.
No, that's what I thought it was. That was our succession plan.
Hence, we never sleep.
Yeah, that stunk. Awesome. All right, thank you so much, Keith. I appreciate it. So next up, Mariryan Starr, president over at Modus. Been with Modus since 2003, helping build that consultancy there. I think a little share. I think these guys just moved up from Sanford into Raleigh, so they're right in downtown Raleigh, ready to hit the market hard. And she works with us on our account too, and does an awesome job. So Mariryan, take it away.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate that. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of messaging and the impact in 2016. Keith was talking about the war for talent, and we're really talking about the war for attention. So a lot of companies kind of neglect that piece, thinking about the message that they're sending externally and also internally. Today we're going to focus on that external element, but when there is a clear message and a clear understanding and a clear breakdown of what you do, why you do it well, what makes you appealing, that's something that is important to educate your internal employees on as well so that they can tell your story. But we're going to focus a lot today on just that external piece. So the question we're asking is, what does your customer actually see? And how often do you look at yourselves from the customer's point of view? I think we're all very accustomed to having the strategy meetings with leadership teams and talking about what you do well and what you're going to share externally and how you look compared to last year, what your vision is for 5 years from now. But that information and being proactive, that's significant, but it's also important to kind of check against the environment in which you're operating and seeing what others are saying and doing. So really what we're asking is, what's capturing the attention in your market right now? So you may have a message, you may have an idea of what you want to say, but is that significant and relevant right now with what your market's paying attention to? Also, we ask, what are other companies that are similar to you saying? And some of these companies may be competing for the same dollars you're competing for, and some of them you may not even consider to be, quote, competitors, but they are actually competing for those same dollars. So we want to know what they're saying about themselves and how we compare. And the biggest danger is, what if we look at things like that and realize that it's all the same? Imagine what the customer experience must be when you're bombarded with information in this 2016 information age where you don't really have a moment to rest. You're constantly being fed content and information. What if it's all the same? How do they distinguish or make a judgment about you and about reaching out to you for further discussion? So while we recognize it's really important to be proactive and for your leadership teams to think about what you want to say about yourselves and align with your vision, it's also really significant to adjust to the tides of the market and pay attention to what's going on environmentally so that you can stay relevant. Next slide, Eric, please. So, everyone says, well, how do I do that? Well, if you don't have the opportunity to partner with a firm to do research on your audience, and there are many audiences you may consider. Again, externally, it's significant to prospective customers, but this kind of messaging is also significant, to Keith's point, for potential employees that you might be recruiting. All of this is, all of these are different audiences that are relevant to your success and survival, in a fast-moving industry. So how do you actually get started on this? If you don't have the means or resources to do formal research, do your own quick audit, or even assemble a team of a couple of people to do a little search. Look at homepage text. Look at search engine results. Look at sell sheets. Look at other collateral that your competitors, or again, companies or entities that are competing for the same dollars you're competing for, are using. And look at the language that they choose. Look at what they're saying about themselves, and imagine yourself in the position of the potential customer, and ask yourself, how easy is it for me to understand this, and how different do they really all seem? When we do this kind of research with our customers, we find that there's a lot of similarities in the language that's being used, and that creates a real difficulty for prospects, and it often can prevent them from reaching out to you further. So if you really sit back and look and are honest about how you stack up, you might be able to see some opportunities to clarify or be more direct in your language so that you have an opportunity to stand out more in that crowd. Next slide, Eric. So, when we work with companies, we often talk about language that we would stay away from, and we individualize this to everyone, but this is a list of words that we've seen frequently over the years, and we kind of list them on the no-no list. These are words you don't want to use as you're speaking about yourselves or selling your services or products externally. So you're going to see a lot of things on here that you say, well, listen, I am personal, I am innovative, I do have integrity, and all of those may very well be true. But the question is it valued by your audience? And does it actually carry meaning with your audience anymore? We found that over time, some words have been overused so much that it becomes absent of the meaning it was originally intended for. And in fact, in some ways, it actually has the opposite effect. So as prospects are looking at words like integrity or trustworthy, they may actually wonder why you have to say that, because it does seem like a basic ticket of entry that you have to have those types of things to be, a successful business and operate, and they expect it. So when you take the time to pause and say, hey, we're trustworthy and we have integrity, it often raises more questions than it does, than you think it would. And so we tell our clients to stay away from some of these words because they don't actually allow you to differentiate, and they don't allow you to actually tell the story the way it's meant to be told. So, that's the summation from our end. It's just to really be careful about the words you're choosing. Make sure that, if you have very limited time, which you do, in capturing the attention of these prospects, that you're using language that is memorable, that is meaningful for what you offer and deliver, and that will actually leave a lasting impression that can lead to action on their part to seek out more.
So, Mariryan, once you get the messaging right, the words right, in your words, how do you know where to start spending money on getting that message out? In other words, what tactics to use?
Right. Well, definitely, settling on that message platform and making sure that you're looking externally at the environment you're operating in and competitors is important. And we find that, clients we work with, once they have that message platform, they feel a lot more confident about making decisions from that point forward. But the tactics that you'd want to work on first are the ones that are serving you constantly. So your website, for example, homepage text, things that are going to be kind of the first stop for a prospect. Those are the places you want to spend your time and energy, a sell sheet as well, because not only if you invest in that, you're going to be able to slice it up and use it in many different ways. So we find that if you make those investments in those key pieces, it actually comes back to deliver a lot more value in the end, because you can cut it up and use it in smaller pieces or write-ups, you know, in a journal or anything else in the future. It kind of gives you that foundation from which to work. But I'd be remiss, too, if I didn't say that one of the most important tactics is to share this type of information with your internal staff, so that they are understanding and professing and sharing the same type of language in their interpersonal conversations as well, so that when the prospect or potential customer sees this language, sees this, you know, brand feel externally, they're also met with the same experience internally when they interact interpersonally.
Excellent. Good point. Good point. And something you've helped really kind of drive home here at Technology Associates. So thanks. Next up, real estate trends for 2016. Street Jones. He's a broker over at Rich Commercial Realty. Been there, 2 years. Man, I thought you were old school over there, man. I know from experience. Green.
Green.
Yeah. Rich has really helped us back when it was kind of more of a tenants market, which is good for me, and did an awesome job with that. So Street's going to tell us a little bit about what he sees on the horizon in the real estate market for 2016. So take it away, Street.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Street Jones from Rich Commercial Realty. We work not only locally in the Triangle, but we work across the state and across the country as well. So a lot about what I'm going to talk about has to do with the market as a whole that we're seeing across the country as we're working in this market. So before I get into these slides here, I just kind of want to touch on where we are right now and how we got to where we are right now in terms of the real estate market and the cycle. Historically, you see in the real estate cycle that it is a tenant market for 5 to 6 years, and then a landlord's market for 2 to 3. So obviously 2009 kind of began the tenant market with the recession and the downturn, and then we saw that change last year. Last year became the first year of a true landlord's market, and the only time really during that period from 2009 to last year to 2015 that we saw really any kind of stalling in the market was during the government sequester in 2013, but that really didn't have a significant impact at all. As soon as that was resolved, the market picked right back up and it kind of took over where it left off. So last year being 2015 being the first year of the landlord cycle, we foresee that continuing through 2016 and into 2017. So what does that mean? That means, as a lot of you know, employment is on the rise and companies are having to grow. That means that they're absorbing more commercial real estate on all aspects. Industrial, office, and retail are all being absorbed more, and that there's less vacancy in commercial portfolios. We're finding a lot of tenants are having the desire to expand their space, and then if they're not able to expand their space, then they're very likely to move to a new location somewhere where they will have that opportunity, and that space will not prohibit them growing. So from a tenant standpoint, if you are a smaller tenant in a multi-tenant building, you certainly need to be conscious of the other tenants that are around you, the other tenants in your building, and granted, they might be certainly different businesses than what yours are. You need to keep tabs on how are they growing, because if, like I said, if they're a bigger tenant and they're in need of expanding, and depending on what your lease says, the landlord might have the right to relocate you in the building, or might have the right to, at the end of your term, basically give you the boot in order to let that larger tenant expand if they need to expand. So in a landlord's market, what we're seeing is certainly higher rental rates. We've seen locally in the Raleigh Triangle market, we've seen rental rates increase from 2015, beginning of 2015, January of last year to now, in some submarkets by 25%, which is just astronomical. and that's leaving sticker shock for a lot of existing tenants, tenants that maybe signed their lease during the right at 09 or 2010, right at the beginning of the tenant markets, and those leases are coming up for renewal. They're getting sticker shock in that their new rental rates are higher than the escalated rate that they're paying right now. So being it's a landlord's market, landlords are certainly less likely to negotiate. They're less likely to give concessions, months of free rent, or contribute to any improvement dollars to help tenants do work that might need to be done to their space. And that kind of gets us into kind of the 2016 trends. And we know that trends as far as real estate are concerned aren't just necessarily related to the economics and where we are in the economic cycle, but also in how companies are utilizing their space. Keith talked earlier about the war for talent, and we know that culture can be defined partially by the physical environment of a tenant's space or of a company's space. So how your space looks and functions is extremely important for you to attract and retain that talent. And that might mean having more collaborative areas or opening your space up, getting away from that traditional hard wall office. And it might take a little bit of money to do some work to your space to get it to what your competition is doing, to get it up to speed to 2016, so you can retain and attract that new talent. And that's getting harder and harder to do as we get deeper and deeper in the landlord's market, trying to get those tenant improvement dollars. Companies we're seeing are also trying to do more with less space. Obviously, with the improvements in technology, that has helped some companies be able to reduce their footprint, as well as I guess kind of the trend of having some folks work from home. That's certainly helping them reduce their space use as well. We're seeing companies utilize furniture a lot better in order to get a smaller space and kind of hedge against the next downturn. We know a lot of businesses and a lot of companies were hurt in 2008 and had way too much space and were left on the hook paying rents for space that they did not utilize. And we've seen a lot of companies in 2015 try to change that to kind of hedge against what might happen in the future. And we certainly see that trend continuing in 2016 as well. Next slide, Keith or Eric. Interest rates and their impact on the market. And this is the case in most markets, most large and medium-sized markets across the country. Purchasing versus leasing. So interest rates the last couple years have been very low. It's been an ideal time to take advantage of those. And what we're finding now is from 2010, now that the economy is rebounding, companies are profiting, they're rocking and rolling, and they're wanting to explore opportunities to purchase as opposed to lease. And that is fantastic, but it certainly presents an issue of inventory when you've got a lot of companies and a lot of business owners and decision makers looking for similar type of space. In many markets, what we're finding is, yes, they might have the ability, the interest rates might be right, their financials are all in place and ready to go to buy that option and have their business plug into that and get away from their leased space, but the inventory is preventing them from doing so. And what we're still seeing right now is a lack of new product in most medium to large size markets. I imagine we're going to see some more new product in 2016 come out of the ground in the medium and larger markets, but that's been a little bit slow to rebound. So we're across the board in need of new product. Advice for 2016, knowing that it's a landlord's market, is to get in the game early and engage a commercial real estate broker wherever you might be, and have that person help you understand the market, understand your sub-market. Your sub-market can vary from a submarket that's only a few miles away, depending on where you're located. And that broker can help you create leverage by looking at those other options. Commercial real estate brokers, really, I say about 60% of what we do is educating our clients, letting them understand the market, letting them understand what their competition is doing in the market so that they can make the best decision for their business and think about the future as well. Understanding where you fall and where your space falls, your lease might fall in the real estate cycle is important. As I mentioned, you've got a lot of tenants that got great deals and great rates, rental rates in 2009 and 10 into 11, and they're getting that sticker shock now. So understanding, what your business might need to do in terms of growth, and then where it falls in the real estate cycle. Having that conversation with a commercial real estate broker can help you plan for the future. That's all I've got.
So, Sri, you mentioned new product. It seems driving around there's a ton of stuff being built in Raleigh. Is that just all residential stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're seeing a lot of apartment. That's kind of where the financing went a few years ago. Was pushed into that type of condo, townhouse, apartment type of product. We're really lacking in the industrial and in the new Class A office, at least in the Raleigh Triangle area, and Charlotte as well. There's a giant lack of industrial space really across the state, but especially Raleigh and Charlotte. But yeah, that you're correct. And while there's seemingly a lot of construction going on, a lot of that is residential in nature, and we've got all these people moving and all these new residential units, but we're not having the new office space that companies are wanting to have all these people that are being attracted to the area.
Cool. Awesome info, Street. Look, the next up is supposed to be me. I'm going to change this up a little bit. We've got a few questions, and I want to get through those since we're kind of a little over on time. And then at the end, I'll come back to mine if anybody's around. You can hear what I have to say. So a couple of questions. First, for Keith. Keith, during your presentation, you mentioned really recruiting based on culture. And the question is really kind of how do you do that? How do you go about recruiting based on culture?
Wonderful question. And I'll give a basic consulting answer and say it depends on your company, it depends on the size, the ownership, and all of that. But first step for recruiting on culture is to understand what your culture is and what your core values are. And Kelaca, like many other companies in the area, is an EOS, or Entrepreneurial Operating System company. And so we spend a lot of time talking about our core values internally. That's what Kelaca represents, our internal core values. And knowing exactly what we are about and how those values define our culture. So that when we go to identify and recruit and kind of select candidates for our internal roles, we evaluate them against those core values. And so we have behavioral interview guides built up that help us assess candidates and how they align with those core values. So first you got to understand what are they, and perhaps that's for the company, perhaps that's for a department of a company or a certain manager, whatever it may be, what those core values are, but then build interview guides and selection guides out of that, so when you interview candidates, you're not just talking about the roles and responsibilities and the skill sets, but rather talking about what sort of people we are and how we interact and what our culture is based on the core values.
Excellent, excellent. All right, thanks, Keith. And I got a question for Mimi, that binds off of that. We're EOS also and do a lot of core values, hiring and firing. Legally, Mimi, I mean, can you speak to letting somebody go because you're quote unquote not one of us?
Sure. I mean, generally speaking, unless you have someone under an employment contract, we can let them go for any reason or no reason at all. I think before you, just like you would in any scenario, before you make a final determination about letting someone go, you want to just assess whether or not there's potential liability. And really, even if you're letting someone go simply because they don't fit, or fit the culture, that's perfectly fine. What you have to determine when looking at risk is how could that termination be perceived. So I'll give you an example. If the individual that you've decided doesn't really fit within your culture has recently come back from, let's say, an absence from work for a workers' comp injury, then even though we might be letting them go for this poor culture fit, it has the appearance potentially that we're letting them go because they filed this workers' comp claim. So I think just going through before you make those final decisions and actually implementing the termination, simply looking at and analyzing whether or not there are any potential risks that the termination could appear to be either discriminatory or retaliatory. And at least when you make that decision, you know the risk going into it.
Gotcha. Yeah, good advice there. So the question did come up for you. The cost on misqualifying workers. So okay. So what is the potential risk if you misqualify a worker? In other words, what's going to happen to you? Are there fines? What happens?
Right. If we're misclassifying someone, a worker, as a contractor, then we could be liable for, of course, all the tax payments that we should have been taking out. So our, Social Security contributions, and payroll tax, and that sort of thing. And then if that worker should have been classified as a non-exempt employee and entitled to overtime, then we could be hit for potential overtime pay. And then potentially there could be an issue with state unemployment insurance that might be owed as well. Those are the basic, potential liabilities. There are some penalties and fines depending on the specific fact issue.
Excellent. Good answer. Street, a question for you, and I think you covered this in your presentation, but maybe you could just kind of put some years around it. The question is kind of where are we in the cycle of the tenant-landlord thing? You say we just entered it, and you think we're in it for, 2 or 3 more years?
Yeah, I think so, and certainly through 16 and 17, like I said, that cycle is typically between 2 to 3 years. But really, it all depends on where you are and what size your market is. In North Carolina, example, Raleigh and Charlotte area weren't hit as hard as some of the smaller markets, the High Points and Greensboro. So it really depends on where you are. Those are still a little bit lacking. We're not seeing the kind of growth and the comeback like we've seen in these bigger markets, at least here. But I think at least for the Triangle area, certainly the entire 2016, and I think we'll continue on to 17 before we see any kind of change back or starting to change back to a tenants market.
Cool. Well, now I've got my fingers crossed that my lease runs through 18, so you might want to put that on your to-do list to check and make sure, see if I want to be screwed up. Awesome. All right, look, question for Mariryan. So the question is online versus traditional when you talk about marketing tactics. I get, online used to be the cool thing and everybody was throwing tons and tons and tons of money at it. Does it pay off? Have you seen enough to see that it's better over traditional, or is there maybe a trend back towards more traditional marketing tactics around advertising and print?
Well, there's a time and place for both of those tactics, and they both have their advantages depending on what, the company's situation is. Certainly, we appreciate and continue to, explore how online tactics can be helpful just because you have such a great ability to focus and target so closely the exact audience or prospect you want to target, which means that more of your dollars are going directly to creating an impact with that group. Whereas in the past, some of the more traditional means you've been casting a wider net, so some of your dollars may have missed the mark. However, in that same right, in very niche and vertical markets where companies have very specific products or services they're selling, there's still options and advantages to doing some more traditional advertising in trade publications and things like that still are very relevant. But I would say that we still are putting a lot of digital and online tactics in our plans these days just because we really feel like we can dial in to almost any budget and really make it work and be more effective because of that ability to target and to track.
Awesome. All right, great, thanks. So we're way past time, but we still have everybody kind of hanging around here. So I'm going to jump back to do my thing. So here we go. Me, been around 20 plus years. Sometimes it doesn't seem that long. Started Technology Associates really because I just enjoy helping small businesses get the most out of their technology and giving them some good guidance here. So a couple of changes that are coming up. One, Windows 10 is out, and it is the last version of Windows, and I will explain that. Microsoft is moving away from the traditional, Windows 95, 98, et cetera, large-scale upgrade versions to more of what you see on the Macintosh OS X model. So what you're going to see is ongoing upgrades as the operating system moves along versus these big, huge, leaps, if you will. So Windows 10, how can you get it? It's a free upgrade. You can get it until the end of July of 2016, so this year. Two things. It's an online download, so you got to do that. And you can upgrade Windows 7 and Windows 8.1 to the new Windows 10. If you're on Windows 8, you've got to upgrade it to Windows 8.1 first and then move to Windows 10. Again, you have to do an upgrade. There is no clean install right now. Well, there is, but you have to do the upgrade first, and then you can do the clean install after you do the upgrade. And this is just a licensing catch that Microsoft is trying to go through. Two things. One, you can check with your line of business vendors, QuickBooks or whatever your core application is, and make sure that it's going to be supported under Windows 10. You can go back to your existing version if you upgrade to Windows 10 and don't like it, but you can only do that during the first 30 days. After that, it wipes that out, and you can't go back anymore. There is also a check your PC before upgrading. So if you click on the little nag screen that comes up around getting Windows 10, in the upper left-hand corner, there's a button there to check your PC to ensure that all the hardware is going to work there. Again, it doesn't check software, it just checks hardware. But I'll tell you from experience, Windows 10, really good backwards compatibility. We really haven't run into a ton of issues, a couple of them here and there, but not a lot. Internet Explorer 11, if anyone still uses it. It's good. Again, Microsoft has taken the same approach where they're keeping much tighter bands on what is supported and what is not. Once Internet Explorer 11 continues to push out, you're going to see end of life happen really quick for the rest of the Explorer products. Again, Internet Explorer 11, great backwards compatibility support. I think it's got like 15, 16 different compatibility options that you can fine tune, and we really haven't run into a lot of issues with it at all. I do know for a fact it is faster. Microsoft will tell you it's more secure, rich, and fluid, whatever that means. So it may be worth a while to make that upgrade. IE 11, it runs on Windows 7 minimum, and then it also supports 8.1 and 10. So if you're going for the Windows 10, I would kind of pull those two upgrades apart, maybe do 11 first, get used to that, and then you can go Windows 10. And I think that's it. So that's all I had. Unless anybody has any other questions on the technology side of things, I want to thank our presenters, Mimi, Keith, Mariryan, Street, for joining us today. And stay on the lookout for our next upcoming Expertise in Business webinar series. Thank you.